Hello and welcome to the Awakened Intimacy Podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Greer.
And today we're going to be diving into the topic of how couples can resolve the issue of conflict and distance. It's a complex topic and it has lots of different dimensions. And as we were preparing for this podcast a few weeks ago and this dynamic came up between us, the topic of shame and the issue of shame became really obvious and prevalent, and that's what led us to do the shame podcast before this one. And if you haven't listened to that episode already, highly recommend checking it out as a prerequisite for understanding why we can fall into the dynamic of pursuing and distancing or being walled off or boundaryless, because a lot of the rhetoric and conversation in the conscious relationship space keeps tying back to secure attachment, and the two poles of that dynamic is labeled as anxious and avoidant. Now, we tend to avoid using that specific language because sometimes it doesn't actually describe how the behavior looks on the surface. As someone who is more in the pursuer or boundaryless part of that dynamic, quite often that surface level behavior doesn't look anything like anxiousness. And one of the potential dangers or pitfalls of using that particular language is it can become a slant or judgment on someone's character, that particularly for the more avoidant person, I see it a lot. People that fall into that side of the dynamic get labelled as selfish, entitled, arrogant, or careless, which quite often, and we're going to go into this today, people that are walled off or distant or avoidant often have very good reasons for doing that. So we want to expand this conversation to bring more compassion and understanding for wherever you are on either side of that spectrum.
So when we were preparing for this podcast, as we do with all of our podcasts, and whenever we're teaching with couples, is that we reflect on the teaching and how that actually plays out for us so that we can teach and share from a place of embodiment and real examples. And what we noticed that in the dynamic of pursuer distancer, and that it often tends to actually play out more so with our relationship with our children. And so for those who listen regularly, you will know that we're very open and share very openly on the podcast when it's in relation to just the two of us. But if it relates to our relationship with others, we do keep that private. So that's okay. We just wanted to name that, and that these dynamics will often play out, yes, in intimate partnership, but often it's with kids, it can be with parents, it can be with co-workers. And so it's important to hear and listen out for the common patterns that you may find in relationships, and know that we all tend to have our dominant patterns and reflexes that we'll do, but different relationships and different contexts will tend to bring out different dynamics. And this is why you might have the classic couple who get along really well and they're deeply in love, and then they'll go and meet the in-laws and they'll see their partner in this whole new light, because when the partner's in the family dynamic, all these other things come out. So we just wanted to name that.
And as I said, in preparation for this podcast, we're looking at our own relationship and dynamics, and that's what actually made the topic of shame so prevalent and important to speak on, because there was a moment where we'd had a few triggers between us, and I noticed myself kind of distancing and going and sitting in another room separate from where Greer was, and I caught myself in that moment recognizing that I was walling off and I didn't really want to go into repair because I was feeling this sense of inadequacy, and my reluctance to go in and repair wasn't because I didn't care. It wasn't because I was being entitled and righteous. It was because I was afraid of triggering her again, and I didn't want to feel that inadequacy.
Yeah, and I noticed that I held back from going and pursuing you. And normally, our dynamic is normally if something comes up, I like to go into it straight away. I process quite quickly, and you tend to need some space. And so, again, there is that healthy sense of having distance and taking space to regulate. And then there's the healthy sense of not avoiding and actually going in and pursuing, for want of a better word. But sometimes it's just about the timing also of it. And so I noticed in that, and you comfortability with myself of you needing to take space. And this is what will happen as these dynamics evolve into their dysfunctional playing out and into the functional playing out. And then we recognize what we're doing, just as Aaron just shared in that moment, and understanding why we actually got that behavior.
What do you mean by functional playing out and dysfunctional?
Well, if I think of if that same situation had played out really dysfunctionally, you would have taken dysfunctional space. I would have been in the other outside, and either would have come in and just go, what's going on, and tried to fix it and just get over the discomfort of disconnection. Or I would sit there and ruminate and do almost an internal pursuer within myself. What's he doing, and why does he do that, and why can't he, in that internal dialogue. So that's the dysfunctional playing out. Whereas I see it as the more functional play out is for you to take space and take enough space for you to recognize, oh, I've got this feeling coming up, I'm hesitant. And then once you realize that, you came to me.
Yeah.
And likewise, I took space. And I realised I could sense what you were doing, although I wasn't necessarily aware of your full internal process. I knew that you needed to take space to regulate, and I knew that from our past conversations that the best thing I can do in that situation is just contain myself and not go into story and not chase you and just stay in my centre, in my wholeness. So that's I'm allowing the space, and I will do as much internal inquiry as I need to just recognise what my taking 100% responsibility for my half in that moment is.
There's a lot there.
Well, you asked me. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and I think you are aware of what I need from lots of different discussions and
lots of
triggers,
yeah.
Particularly around you wanting to fix quicker than I was able to process.
Mm-hmm.
And when that would happen, my interpretation of you wanting to fix it would trigger my defensiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And because you were wanting to repair so quickly, or you were wanting to fix, that would bump up against my inadequacies because I didn't know what I was feeling. I didn't know what the trigger was about. And that sense of not knowing would make me feel like, oh, there's something wrong with me here, or I'm wrong because I don't know. And understandably, I'd get defensive and push away. On the other side of that, on the converse side of that, Greer also had a sense of anxiousness, of wanting to repair because there was uncertainty in the dynamic. And this is something really important to understand, is how dysregulating uncertainty is. And that's what is meant by anxiousness, is that there's uncertainty playing out.
Yeah, and it's important to name that I can't ever remember consciously thinking I need to fix this, or even thinking I'm uncomfortable with this, I need to go in and resolve it. Certainly I wasn't aware that I was anxious. So for me, part of the increasing awareness of my own patterns is doing my somatic work and coming more in my body and noticing my body becoming tense, or my palms becoming a bit tight, and using my body to bring me into quicker awareness of the thoughts that are happening. But also it kind of points to why we don't particularly use a lot of the language that is used in relational psychologies, because I know I don't always, and I think the listener doesn't always attach the name of the syndrome, the function, the pattern with their actual behaviour, because as you said, it can look very different. And I think it's also worth sharing that, and we were going to speak to this a bit later, but that something that you shared with me is part of the reason why you would then start to get like if I came in and was asking a question, part of the reason why you would get anxious is that you were interpreting my questioning as interrogation or as like kind of pointing at it, whereas from my perspective often it wasn't a particularly big deal, like, and so I would just be wanting to know or understand it from a place of curiosity. And you said that I'd have this look on my face.
Yeah, it was a serious
talk
look.
about that? Yeah, whereas yeah. And when you share that, I know I can think of both my sisters who get this look, and it does look very serious, but it's almost like a concern, but not a stressed concern. It's like I'm concerned about something, like I'm putting my awareness around it, I'm wanting to understand it. And I know, looking into my family system, how that feels to be on the opposing side of it. So I think that's a good little segue that, and I know I'm kind of veering off the timing, but in terms of the conversation, that if our partner is saying things to us, is like, you do this, or you look like this, or why are you getting so aggressive or angry, is to take a moment and actually ask, have I heard that before? Where have I heard that before? Is this something that I experienced as a child, or that I was told in previous relationships? Because if it is, that points to some kind of pattern, and that's not about pointing the blame and putting it on ourselves. It's about being aware, all right, this is a pattern that I can actually identify. And the gift of that is that once we identify the pattern, we can then kind of go into undoing the parts of that pattern that aren't working for us.
I'm sitting here smiling because I'm actually noticing my own pattern arise here. And once again, we've got a brilliant opportunity for authenticity and unpacking something live on the podcast. And as I move into this, I can feel my heart rate elevating, because as you were sharing then, Greer, I'd noticed myself shutting down. I noticed myself starting to wall off because I didn't feel like I had any space in the conversation. I felt like I couldn't keep up with. There were so many different threads that I wanted to speak on, and you'd moved on before I had an opportunity to share or to connect with that. And yeah, I just could feel like this like inner boy, just like, oh, I don't matter here. Your voice is more important. What you've got to say is more important. And so I'm just going to shut down.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel having expressed that?
Much better.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is actually a really classic dynamic that we were speaking about this morning in preparation for this, that there's often a dynamic in a couple where there is one person that just talks all the time and kind of talks at someone, and there's no actual inquiry or space for the other person to share, or when they do share, the other person immediately makes it about them again. And yeah, this is an example of boundarylessness. Like, boundaries aren't just what we say no to. Boundaries also is a containment around ourself and what we've got to share, and whether we overshare, or maybe our emotional expression is too much and it floods the conversation or the dynamic. It makes the other person feel unsafe or unseen or unheard. And it's not necessarily about making that other person wrong or bad. It's about naming the impact of that behavior. And in this way, there's a concept we often use with couples called complementary opposites. So to the degree that one person is boundaryless, the other person might be walled off. And I've got to learn to lower my defenses and boundary and speak up. And in this instance, Greer put a bit more of a boundary around what she's saying or how she's saying it, and just creating a bit more space and attunement to the other person to bring them in. What's that bringing up for you?
Well, what I find is that I'm doing my best to be present and hear you, and I notice that in you sharing, I'm I'm taking it personally. I feel like what you're sharing is pointing to me, and I think that part of it is pointing towards me. But what I notice that in me, the pattern there is that in me feeling a bit criticized or made wrong, that it's blocking me from really hearing what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely a part of me that wants to say, and so she will say that, babe, you did like a great introduction at the start and spoke for a couple of minutes, which was great because that's what we decided and that was part of it. And I don't feel like I really spoke for more than what you did there. So there's this sense of like, yeah, I did take up the stage there, but I didn't feel like I was waffling on or that what I was saying was irrelevant.
Well, I wasn't really comprehending a lot of what you were saying.
Do you think that's because you're in your own internal trigger?
No, I wasn't comprehending, and therefore I felt inadequate and I was shutting down.
What are we going to do about that?
Well, that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
I'm talking about it.
Okay, so let's right, because this is what we do. So let's just tune in, remember coming back to that practices if there is a kind of a bit of a dysregulation, a bit of a thing. Can you feel anything in your body right now? And maybe we just both take a moment to recenter and re-regulate ourselves. Coming back on like the same team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so the thing is, babe, again, I wasn't making you wrong. I wasn't criticizing. I was just naming the impacts of that behavior. And this has happened before in another friendship, another dynamic, where I was simply trying to point out the impact of this lack of relationality and the dialogue just being one way. And yeah, the other person took it really personally and couldn't hear what I was saying as best that I could. This is so often what happens when we feel criticized, when we feel judged. It will trigger that defensiveness. And defensiveness, again, what are we trying to defend against? A sense of inadequacy, a sense that there's something wrong. Again, that's the shame piece.
Yeah, defend against our lovability.
So I feel like this is a really good opportunity to speak about this concept of containment and how it's different from suppressing. It's not denying our needs or denying our truth. Containment is simply having discernment around how we express ourselves and how our expression impacts the other person. So containment is having a boundary around us, and it's not a wall. Think of a boundary as a gate. Like a gate you can see over, it can open, it can close, but a wall is just walled off. It's solid, you can't see through it, there's unknown. A boundary is more relational. Boundary has a communication aspect to it. Walled off is just stonewalled, shut down, push away. Why someone would be in that walled off position, most likely they're trying to protect themselves. They're trying to protect themselves from judgment, from criticism, from being blamed, not feeling enough. And when it comes to being walled off, quite often there's two types of person that will be in this position. There will be a type 1 love avoidant, which is the person that grew up in a family system where people lived around walls. There was no intimacy, there was no vulnerability. Everyone just kind of got on with what they had to do, and there wasn't a lot of space for emotions, and so intimacy is just kind of foreign. It's not necessarily that there's a lot of trauma, it's just that it's unknown. And so moving out of that will still take courage because it's unfamiliar, yet that is easier to work with. A type 2 love avoidant is someone who's actually had their boundaries encroached and impeded upon in childhood. So there's actually a deeper trauma there. And that boundary can be like psychically, like there could have been an enmeshment or an emotional dependency on that child from a parent or caregiver. And so that's why they've got walls, or it could be, more serious around abuse, sexual abuse, and that's why they've got high walls, strong defenses.
Yeah, and I think also, as you said, that that trauma can be capital T or small t, but it's the and the sense of like a family who is, we do everything together. We have meals together, we all go out together for a weekend. That sense of like encroachment of, I just actually want to be able to have an independent voice and assert my independent will. And so again, that doesn't have that family, perhaps, and this is probably describes more of my family of origin, in the sense that we didn't have to do everything together, but like we did do a lot together. But I mean, obviously as a child, the term enmeshment wasn't in my vocabulary, but I never really felt like that. But what has happened is I've gotten older, and then we live with my mum, and in the same house that I grew up in, seeing these patterns just play out and recognizing that there was this kind of inherent need to have meals together, and that there was a lack of autonomy, and it wasn't coming from anything negative, like consciously or mean, but it still has impacted the boundary and a sense of boundaryless. And what I will also share is that our need of boundary, in terms of where we need to have our boundary, and again that could be up or down, but it can also be just the amount of space that we need. So perhaps I always keep my boundary here, but sometimes I can have it out and allow more in, and sometimes at the moment I'm on my bleed, and so I'm needing to have more space, things a bit slower, I'm a bit more sensitive. I need to kind of put that boundary in a bit closer around myself, so that it can also change not only up and down but also out and in, and what feels good allowing in.
Yeah, and what really makes a boundary functional is communication. It's as simple as that. As Greer mentioned something earlier around dysfunctional distance taking, and that's simply distance taking with no communication. And again, the impact of someone who ghosts or just disappears, which I used to do early on, is it creates uncertainty for the other person. And so that uncertainty creates a dysregulation, and suddenly they find themselves in a case of the more they distance, the more the other pursues, and the more that person pursues, the more threatening it feels, and so the more the other person distances. And one of the things that we share with couples is, if you do need space to regulate, to come into your center and feel safe, that's okay. Just communicate it. And that's a framework that we share on how to communicate that within awakened intimacy, and it's something that's worked really well in our relationship as well, because I grew up as an only child. I grew up needing, or just not needing, but spending a lot of time by myself, and that alone time is really regulating for me. So not only is alone time regulating, being around high energy or big emotional expressions, like I feel it in my nervous system. Like when the kids are yelling, I feel a shiver go up my spine, and it's just like, ugh, and it gets overwhelming for me. And early on in our relationship, I would just see you later. I wouldn't even say see you later. I'd just disappear and wouldn't tell anyone. And the thing around when there's uncertainty, our partner can't help but just make up stories around why the other person's shut down or taking space. So the best thing that we can do to help them is communicate.
Yeah, and I think That's a really good example, and I just want to clarify that you wouldn't just go away for days at a time.
No,
You would just
yeah.
go into another room or something, and I would
Yeah.
be walking around, where the fuck is Aaron gone again? Like out with the chickens or something. And what I noticed in that situation is that if myself as mother, I'm there like tending to everyone's needs, and then you disappear, and I feel like I'm talking to you, but you're doing something else, and I'm not being heard, that will naturally evoke this boundarylessness, because I'm here giving to everyone because I don't quite have the boundaries to say no or ask for help, or perhaps it just feels easier to do it myself, so I'm just going to do it myself, even though it's another thing I have to do. And I know this is a really common dynamic that I used to have and that many mums have. I can still fall into it sometimes, and sometimes there is the reality is just easier to do it ourselves, and at the same time, again, if that becomes a dysfunctional pattern, often it's actually subtly about control. And so it makes sense for a woman, and I will speak as woman because I am woman and mother, that if I'm having to give to everyone and there isn't really that boundary and I'm feeling drained, it makes sense that my communication also looks like that. And it might mean that then if my partner wants to talk to me, I actually can't do it. I'm so in this energy of just giving out that I actually can't really hear what you're saying, which will then lead you to feel like
My needs don't matter.
Yeah, like your needs don't matter, which will then, what would that lead you to do?
Wall off, see you later.
Yeah, which then pursue. So again, the more that happens, and so this is how, again, it might on paper, if we were to read about someone who is the mother who is giving lots, she may feel that there just may be no awareness that she's being boundaryless in her conversation. It's just because that's the way her energy is moving, and it makes actually a lot of sense that also flows into her communication until she becomes aware of that. And if I can just add on to that because of that continual giving, it feels like she's always putting herself last. Her needs don't matter. And the opportunity there is to recognize that without pointing the blame on anyone, the impact of that dynamic of the pursue of the wall is that both people feel like their needs don't matter. And that can be a point of commonality and coming together, coming back on the same page. Like, I feel like my needs don't matter. You say, I feel like my needs don't matter. It's like, oh, they do, and this like sense of, yeah, your needs matter, both of our needs matter, and it can actually become a bridge to connection rather than defending, well, your needs don't matter, and what about my needs not mattering? Yeah. It's like that point of sameness can become the connection.
Nice. Yeah, and something else that I really noticed is how this sense of lack really feeds this pursuer-distancer dynamic, and that can be a lack of certainty or a lack of assurance, and it can also be a lack of self-esteem and needing another person to feel whole. I know this was very real for me before coming into a relationship. I wasn't aware of it, but I was needy because of my own lack of self-esteem and needing another person to make me feel enough, to make me feel whole and lovable. And it puts this incredible weight on the relationship, and will also feed into, if that person has lack, they are going to be boundaryless. They are going to diminish their needs for the sake of keeping the other person, even if it's unhealthy, because that fear of abandonment and having to face the lack of enoughness is scarier than having to put in a boundary. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just contemplating because you used some words that I recently wrote about, but it was kind of the complementary opposite for me in a previous relationship, in that my fear of hurting the other led me to be boundaryless within myself. That my focus was on not hurting my partner at the time and keeping that boundary and the relationship together at the cost of, I kind of had to not quite dissolve myself, but my own needs I had to kind of become boundaryless in that, and focus the boundary around the relationship so that it would stay together.
You know, there's two people within a relationship, and if those two people are their own little circle, then if they're in relationship, then there's a bigger circle around those two circles. Now, if there's a lack in one of those circles, whether it's a lack of self-esteem or a lack of certainty, then that's going to impact the strength of the container around the relationship. What that brings up for me is I can remember like early on in our relationship when we had lack of certainty around our finances, and I would be shut down and walled in because I was like stuck in my head. I was feeling like I wasn't providing enough. I'm not good enough as a man. Feeling like a failure. And that's lack of enoughness in terms of my wholeness, if I am a circle within our relationship, that lack of wholeness would make me shut down. That would create my own uncertainty, and because I wasn't communicating what I was uncertain about because I didn't want to face the shame around it, then that would create uncertainty within the relationship because you weren't certain around why I was so distant.
Yeah, and yet when you actually in those times, and it was, over a few years on and off, in those times where you would say, I just feel like I can't actually give you what you need, or I don't feel like I'm good enough for you. That was the type of language, is that when you were honest about that, if we were to give that two-circle analogy, what that gifted me is the opportunity to strengthen within myself. So stay compassionate with you and loving to you, but also, and I don't know if I've voiced this before, but really actually, what if you weren't enough for me, in the sense that what if that relationship did dissolve and we weren't together? And again, we had many stresses playing into our relationship in the first few years. There were a lot of things playing out. And so the gift of you being honest, and this is why the truth and the love are those two sides of the same coin, is that would lead me to kind of go in within my own circle. It's like, well, okay, if this relationship didn't stay together and if I were to detach from that, would I be okay? Would I be enough? And that would strengthen my own circle. And then because I'm not needing you to work it out, I'm not needing you to be man enough for me, I can hold that wholeness within myself. That puts less pressure on you from my end and less pursuing, no, come on, then that ultimately strengthens, as if you think of the yin yang as a symbol, that like strengthens my part, my half of the relationship, which holds almost the template for that strength. And then you would come into that own certainty in yourself. And then because we've both come up within that ourselves, we've got two strong wholes, then the collective whole is strong. And then we go up another octave, if you want, of our relationship and the strength and what our relationship can hold, and the degree of trust builds because it's safe for you to speak your doubts and I can hold that. And then likewise, when we have things where things are coming up with me, I can speak that doubt to you. And so, yeah, I feel like I've just spoken about lots of topics again in one go.
You have. I think what it really speaks to is the necessity for a relationship to grow. If there is a lack of healthy self-esteem within the relationship, then it's imperative that both people be working on that, or it's going to impact the well-being of the container that is the relationship that holds those two people together in a healthy way.
Yeah, and it's, if you finish a little bit, yeah. And so it points, because when I'm working with women individually, I'm often, although it may not be named, it's really about self-esteem, a lot of it. And that work is really about, true self-esteem is actually about living as our truth. Because when we're actually connected to our deeper truth and we're living in alignment with our deeper values and who we are and what we really want, our self-esteem becomes an inherent quality within us, because it's not about what we can or cannot do or provide or receive, or it's nothing. It's about us being ourselves, and the self-esteem, we're seeing us in our true lights. We don't need to be better than or less than. We're just who we are. And again, it's so essential within a relationship that both people do that inner work. Sure, it's great if you can do that work together and you make that a part of your relationship, but either way you both need to be doing that work, because that creates that strength.
I would say that I don't even know if it is possible to do that if you are in a relationship and you're both doing the self-esteem work, I just don't see how you couldn't do that together. Because, to tie it back into distance pursuer, they are behaviors that are arising as a result of a lack of self-esteem, a lack of certainty, security in the relationship. So, and this is why we say triggers are doorways, not only to intimacy, but healing and transformation. So whenever Greer notices that she is trying to fix, or she's being boundaryless, or I notice that I'm getting defensive and pushing away, like, that's the opportunity. That pattern, that behavior has arisen because there's an opportunity here to actually go deeper, look at what's underneath the surface here. What's the vulnerability?
Yeah.
What's the inadequacy about? Where's this trigger coming from? What's driving this behavior? Because then we can actually start to get to the root cause of our dysfunction. Whether it's a big T trauma or little t trauma. Reality is, the more that we can integrate these parts of us that create the dysfunctional behavior, as Greer said, we can live as that true self, our true authentic self, which is the part of us that lives beneath the conditioning, the roles, the trauma, all of that egoic surface layer stuff is not only what impedes intimacy, but it also becomes like the rich, fertile soil to create intimacy as you work through it together.
Yeah.
But
no, 100%. I guess I'm in the mind of a listener who's like, well, yeah, I want to do that, but my partner's not doing that.
Well, let's speak to it.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to do. So Aaron's right in that it's almost like, how can you not do it in a relationship? Plenty of people do it not in relationship. Plenty of people the men just go to do their men's work, and the women might do her women's work. And when it's not, there are lots of people who do that. And as Aaron said, you can do it, but if you can do it within a relationship, that is a win. Like, if your partner is doing the work as well, bring it together and share deeply, because you're going to get a whole new level of insight and awareness if you're going through that in the daily life of living in partnership.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I disagree, because we get wounded in relationship, and this ties back into that conversation around shame. And like, if we were the only human being on the planet, would we feel shame? Would we feel inadequate? Would we feel like we're not enough? I would argue that no. We'd just be completely accepting and free and exactly as we are. So we learn and get these relational traumas in relationship, and so the medicine is in relationship as well.
I totally 100% agree, but what if someone's partner isn't interested in it?
Well, you can still work through some of your self-esteem issues for sure. What it's going to lead to eventually is that developmental friction.
Exactly, that's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
Do
you want to speak to it?
No, it's okay. That's
And it's as simple as one person's growing, and that means that they're working through their patterns, they're becoming more secure in themselves, they're not going to be as needy, and that's going to start to trigger the other person, because suddenly they've got boundaries, and it's like, wait a minute, you're not feeding. You've changed. You're not feeding me what you used to give me. What's going on? And suddenly there's a threat. There's uncertainty in the relationship. But wait, you're changing. Our dynamic is no longer giving me what it was, and suddenly that uncertainty triggers their adaptive responses. Maybe that person starts to pursue more, and you got to have stronger boundaries. It's like, no, I've been given you and been boundaryless for 10, 20 years, and now I'm stopping. And that's going to be a big reckoning for the other person. And it doesn't make the other person wrong if they aren't willing to develop, or they can't develop as quickly as the other person. It's just how human beings are, and that we've got our different genetic makeup, we've got a different trauma history, and it can be really difficult if there is now a developmental friction and one person has evolved more than the other person to be able to relate, to be on that same page. It's unfortunately it is something we've seen quite a lot.
And it's certainly, I'm like, because I walked that path, and that line you've changed, I've been on the hearing end of that, and it's true. We do, if we grow, we change. And this is what I know from the women that I work with and the women who are honest with me, is that it's one of the reasons why they might not do that deeper work is because they're too scared of what will happen if they get really honest with themselves. Because by nature, when we get real and we drop the veils and our shoulds, and we actually get clear on what we want, we come into the deeper core of who we are. And so in one sense, there's this deepening coming into centerhood, and at the same time that leads us to expand. What we want, what we need expands. What we're calling in expands. And so there's this like concentric circles both going in and out. And it means that as you shared, Aaron, things that used to work don't work. Things that were enough are no longer enough. And it's really scary. And the gift of again doing that deeper self-work in terms of our self-esteem is that in that journey of becoming more centered within self, and then also and more whole within the self, and simultaneously getting really clear on what the vision for our life is and what we're wanting. And this isn't about I want to go, I want to be on a 6-figure whatever. It's just about like, I know for me, it was intimacy. Like, I want intimacy in my life. This like declaration. I didn't know what I was doing back then, but I know now. I can see like energetically, it's just, I'm calling it intimacy in this like huge expansion. This is what I want in my life, from this place of deep self-centeredness. And that meant I no longer went into those same relational patterns that I was doing. I was no longer playing my part. And so the relationship literally can't continue. It's either got to evolve and both of you upgrade and you come into a new way of relating, or the discrepancy is too much and the relationship, the nature, that container around the two people will dissolve. And it's a scary journey. It's a hero's journey, a heroine's journey. And so once again, I've gone a bit off topic, but I think this is how the boundaryless, the walled off, can actually look like in real life. And in real life, it's not as simple as saying, oh, you're boundaryless, you're a pursuer, you're a distancer. It's whoa, my life feels like it's falling apart because the boundaries that I used to chase and not have are dissolving, and a whole new experience unfolds, and that's unsettling, and it creates a lot of unknowingness. And final thing I'll share is that from that place of not knowing, a deeper truth arises, a deeper knowing.
Nice.
You're welcome.
And really, what we're touching on here in terms of the self-esteem work and our relational patterns, and using relationship as a crucible, like a container for transformation and healing, is really like the core of what awakened intimacy is all about. It's about becoming more conscious, bringing the unconscious to the conscious so that it no longer drives our behavior. And in this way, we actually evolve and we actually come more into the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala is no longer running the show as much. This is maturing. This is growing up. Ken Wilber says we wake up, we grow up, we clean up, we show up. Waking up is becoming more conscious. Growing up is maturing. Cleaning up is going into the shadow and clearing out all that trauma And then we show up and we share the gold, we share the wisdom, and we lead others and help others to do the same. And I really believe in that model. And awakened intimacy is about walking the path of love, of truth, which will transform your life.
Mm-hmm.
Committing to your truth, your deeper truth, having integrity around your word and being honest, having the courage to dive into your shadow and your unconscious patterns. It's a courageous path. It is not easy. It's not lovey-dovey.
No. But there is lots of love.
The payoff is worth it because it is lovey-dovey when you do the work. On the other side of the intense triggers and the deep vulnerability and the intense shame. And look, I have compassion and understanding for particularly the men that aren't willing to open up and wake up in relationship, because a lot of our conditioning frames vulnerability as weakness. I tend to forget that there is still many men living out there with that program. I naively think, oh, we've moved on from that, haven't we? But time and time again, I have men showing up with this foundational program that vulnerability is weakness, and it's not. Vulnerability is the most courageous, integral thing a man can have, because it's honoring the truth. It's honoring the truth within him, and it's having the courage and strength to express it.
Yeah, and I really honour the women out there who are genuinely like almost terrified that if I actually really get honest with myself, it's gonna have too much harm on people. And I don't judge that at all, because it's real. But it doesn't have to mean the ending of a family. It could actually mean just you getting really clear on what you're really needing, what you're really wanting, and then you, from that certainty, and then you kind of lift your partner, and then you go in it together. And what I will share, and for me, a certain time in my journey, there was a whole moment, and I won't go into the whole story, but I got really clear on, as mother, what is it that I really want to teach my children. And it was that I had two young daughters at the time, and it was that they know their truth and that they honour their truth. And if there's one thing that I teach them as their mum, that's what matters. And as I saw that with so much clarity, I knew that there was no way I could truly teach them that if I didn't do that myself, and that is actually the most loving thing I could do for them. So I invite you as mum, if this is you, or as woman, as man, it's like, what is it? Like, what is that deeper truth within you? What do you want to be able to gift your children in your world, and how can you live that? And then you make choices from that place. Becomes that inner compass.
Yeah.
So if you have something within you has stirred within this, and that you are in a relationship where you're both wanting to go in and do that deeper work, we invite you to book in a relationship clarity call and breakthrough session with Aaron.
Yeah, because really at the core of it, it is mapping what your pursuer distancer dynamic is, and getting really clear on what that is, the impact of it, like lovingly, the impact of it, and most importantly, what the strategy is for both of you to come back into more intimacy and connection and security, because that pursuer distancer dynamic will look different for different couples, because the reality is I'm a bit of both. I do tend to get defensive and wall off, but I'm also a pursuer at times, and I have a bit of a neediness, a needy boy inside me.
Yeah.
And again, it's not about blame, it's not about judgment and making one person wrong, or that if only they'd change. This is the common thing. If only they'd change, we'd be okay. It's about looking at, okay, you're both responsible for your half of the relationship. You're 100% responsible for your half of the relationship. What's the work that you've got to do in your dynamic? And, to thread back into that dynamic that we spoke about earlier, where Greer would be genuinely curious, but I would interpret that as she's interrogating me. The work there for me is to contain that inner boy within me, my adaptive child, and to know that I'm not being interrogated. There is no threat here. That's my work, being 100% responsible. And then the work in that dynamic for Greer is to also just be aware of that in me and to see if she can soften her gaze or her expression when she is genuinely curious. So we can both help each other.
Yeah. And the really great thing about that particular call, the relationship clarity call, is that, as you said, you do actually point out the dynamic and let people know, you know, where the work is for themselves. And it's offered at a 50% off at a normal call. And that is to give, it's a really great opportunity to feel into what it is to work with Aaron or with us, but also you actually come away from the call with something.
Yeah.
And if you're not in relationship, or if you're in relationship but your partner's not quite ready for whatever reason, then we invite you. We also work with men and women individually. So I work with women, Aaron works with men, and so you can tee up a complimentary alignment call with us where we can see if we're a fit for you. So if you're interested, you can just message us, you know, alignment call with Aaron, alignment call with Greer, or a relationship clarity call.
Yeah.
Great. Well,
Cool.
Thank you for your time, your energy. We really appreciate you listening and tuning in. Your time is precious. If you have any questions or comments, feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Peace out.
Bye.